What's up, Who Dat Nation? It's Chris Voglu from Boot Crew Media's Straight Up Saints podcast, and this video is presented by Hornitos Tequila, the official tequila of Boot Crew Media. Before we get into the topic for this video, which is Bradley Roby, the new Saints cornerback who they acquired this week in a trade with the Houston Texans, I want to remind you guys, as always, to like the video and subscribe to Boot Crew Media's YouTube page. It would greatly help out the channel. Now, the Saints had a huge need going into week one of the season, which was the cornerback position, and while that will still be a huge concern for their season opener against the Green Bay Packers, which I'll talk about in just a second, it probably won't be a concern moving forward after week one of the season, and that's because the Saints pulled off a really big trade on Wednesday with the Houston Texans involving Bradley Roby, the veteran quarterback who was drafted out of Ohio State in the first round of the 2014 NFL draft. And for the past few months, you've heard me and just about every Saints analyst, reporter, and podcaster say the team has a huge hole at outside cornerback opposite of Marshawn Lattimore. Well, the team just took care of that biggest need this Wednesday because Bradley Roby isn't just a temporary Band-Aid. He isn't an Eli Apple-esque cornerback who will give you one or two good weeks over the course of a season. No, he is a legitimate number two cornerback who has shown throughout his career with the Broncos and definitely over the past couple of years with the Houston Texans that he can play a lot of cover 1, 2, and 3. And although the cover 4 aspect of his game isn't there, and that's something that the Saints would like to run this season, especially with defensive secondaries coach Chris Richard, you have to take into account that Roby is a versatile corner, and the fact that he will be the number 2 cornerback, not the number 1 cornerback, which is something that he was accustomed to in Houston, should allow him to have more success, especially when we take into consideration that the Saints have been excellent at developing cornerbacks and kind of getting the best out of them over the past couple seasons, which I will talk about in just a second. Now, as for the compensation of that trade, that really hasn't come out and been really official yet because this trade actually hasn't been announced by both teams at this moment. It's about to be finalized, and it's basically one of those things that is a paper or two away from being signed, from this thing being legitimate, but all signs point to this being done, and this was something that the Saints considered a must. They said for weeks, maybe even months, that they wanted another cornerback. Now they get in Bradley Roby. They made a ton of calls, and frankly, considering all the names that we linked to the Saints over the past couple of weeks, I would say this is the best possible option that was out there because, one, you're not going to spend a ton like you would if you were to acquire a Stephon Gilmore or another high marquee cornerback that's on the market. However, you also don't have to worry about bringing in a free agent like the Saints did with Desmond Trufant or even Prince Amukamara or a Richard Sherman or a Garyon Conley, because those are guys who you don't know what's really left in the tank. Is there much gas, much mileage left in them? You don't really know. Now you get in Bradley Roby, who's in the prime of his career. He knows what it takes to play against top competition. He's going to be reunited with former Buckeyes, which should only help him because at this point, the Saints have become the Ohio State Saints or the New Orleans Buckeyes, whichever one you want to call it. So there's a lot of factors there. And now, being in a defense that all the pressure is not going to be on him, I think you're going to get a lot out of him. And we've seen with Bradley Roby, he's not going to be that high interception number corner, but he's going to make a lot of breaks on the ball. Is he going to show you that he can be, at the very least, a decent cornerback for the New Orleans Saints, a starting caliber cornerback for the New Orleans Saints? Absolutely. And Nick Underhill did a great job of kind of saying, can they get a Ken Crawley 2017 season type out of Bradley Roby? I think that's absolutely possible. And we saw, especially when Aaron Glenn was the secondaries coach for the Saints, that they can develop cornerbacks and kind of get the best season out of them. Now, I don't know if that will be the case with Chris Richard. We can only hope that it will be, but there's no reason to not believe that that could be the case because we've seen his track record with Seattle. We've seen him do good things with Dallas. And frankly, through the preseason, and I know it was only 2 games, I saw enough out of Paulson Adebo to say I like the way the Saints are developing him. And frankly, Ken Crawley out of nowhere has had a resurgence. So I think there's a lot to like about this pairing with Roby and also putting him with this Chris Richard-based secondary. So I really like that. And for the Saints, it just goes to show yet again that they are never content with kind of sticking to the status quo and going with this roster that they have and not looking for upgrades, because this is a team that, if you just follow the breadcrumbs, clearly was trying to get this deal done. And it kind of makes sense now that Latavius Murray was cut after not taking a pay cut because the Saints wanted to free up more money for a player in Bradley Roby who does have a hefty deal and is actually under contract for next season too. Now, I'll talk about that in just a second, but I did find that interesting. So clearly the Saints had something in the works, knew they were going to strike a deal for a cornerback, wanted a little bit more extra money, couldn't wiggle it out of Latavius. So you know what? Promote Tony Jones Jr. to officially to RB2, save some money with getting rid of Latavius. He can go off somewhere else and get playing time, maybe in a Baltimore or somewhere else, and the Saints can get the cornerback too that they desperately need. And I'm really excited to see what goes down with this move, especially now. Like I said before, Roby will not be in the lineup for week 1. That is because he's finishing out his suspension for violating the league's PED policy, which came from last season. He just has 1 game left, so he'll miss the opener against the Packers. That gives him about a week and a half to kind of learn the playbook, get up to speed as quick as possible. And then we'll probably see him in the lineup for a week 2 showdown with the Carolina Panthers, which will obviously be a big deal because the Saints, especially in the NFC South, you can't really afford to drop divisional games. So we'll see what happens in that regard. Now, as for the Roby contract, which I talked about before, it was a 3-year deal with the Texans that he signed in 2020. Obviously, the first year of that contract has already been done with. This is the second year of the contract. And as for the third year, it's something that you kind of have to play a wait and see approach with. If he does well with the Saints, sure, they'd love to keep him on for that third year and maybe work out the numbers to make sure that it's not a contract that's overbearing. And if it doesn't work out, I'm sure the Saints will find a way to get out of that contract because, frankly, this is something that they've always done. And they've shown for years that they'll never let a contract dictate whether or not they really keep a player, except this season because, frankly, the pandemic just absolutely obliterated the cap. And that was why they had to make some grueling cuts. But overall, I would not really worry about that contract. If he plays well, the Saints will keep him. If not, they'll find a way to get out of it. But I think this is really an encouraging move for the Saints that were desperately trying to find that Janoris Jenkins replacement. And they might have found it in Bradley Roby. So I'm really intrigued by him. And if you want to find one play that really gets you going, why not find a nice pick that Bradley Roby had on Tom Brady a couple seasons ago, or even a pick 6 he had on Jameis Winston when the Texans played the Buccaneers. And I know that's not what you want to watch. I would much rather watch him pick off Tom Brady, but those are 2 fun highlights you can obviously check out if you want to see what Bradley Roby's all about. So this is a really intriguing move for the Saints, and it's something that could pay dividends, especially down the line when you look at this team, because now if that cornerback 2 hole is shored up, there's not many holes on this football team. The only 2 other positions I'd be drastically concerned about are the wide receiver position and the defensive tackle group. But guess what? Those are both position groups that the Saints could get better at and kind of plug up those holes when they get their superstars back in the lineup in Michael Thomas at receiver and David Onyemata at defensive tackle. So after a horrible offseason in terms of negative news cycle after negative news cycle and just devastating and deflating reports about this team, with week 1 coming up, I'm looking at this Saints team and saying I can see them being a playoff caliber team. Obviously, it depends how the ball bounces their way and which games they're able to take out of and kind of get into the win column. And maybe that all starts with an upset win about the Packers. Who knows? I'll talk about that later this week. But I am definitely going to take an optimistic view, at least cautiously optimistic view of this Saints team, especially after they address the biggest need on this roster. So I'm curious to know what you guys think about this move. Are you excited to see what Bradley Roby can do in the black and gold? Do you think this move is going to be a flop? Do you think it's going to pay major dividends for this team down the road? What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comment section below, and I'll get back to you and let you know what I think as well about maybe what you have to say about this move. And make sure, as always, guys, to like this video and subscribe to Boot Crew Media's YouTube page, because I'll have another video later this week where I'll recap the Saints, actually not recap, preview the Saints season opener against the Green Bay Packers. So it's just going to take place this Sunday in Jacksonville.